Hi, this is Bishop Craig in Lansing, and this is Take One for the week of March 12th. Peace be with you. On Monday, a message went to our synod announcing that Pastor Roseanne Anderson is on medical leave through April 30th, and on May 1st, she will be retiring. This happened quicker than I think any of us expected. We continue to pray for Pastor Anderson, and I ask your prayers for all of us who are taking up Roseanne's share of our common work. I am certainly grieving the loss of this colleague and the way we partnered together. I am so grateful to know Pastor Roseanne and to have worked with her these 5 years. So I'm kind of sad, even as I begin to sense Jesus pointing me to what may come next. So as we live in this bittersweet moment, I ask you to continue to pray. I ask for your patience, and I ask you to send work that would go to Roseanne my way. If your preferred way of communicating with me is by telephone, thank you. Call the synod office. I'll get the message. I'll call you right back. If your preferred way of communicating with me is email, it's going to be a little slower. If your preferred way of communicating with me is Facebook Messenger, it's probably going to be a lot slower because I don't know how much time I'll be spending on Facebook. And if your preferred way of communicating with me is through another member of the staff, that may be slower yet. This is particularly important for the call process, where we really need to stay on top of things. There are currently 22 congregations in, or I expect will be in the call process, 22. 14 of those are full-time calls. So it's really important that congregations in the call process at this time be in conversation with me as things change. I should tell you that our friend Ann Stavros is taking a week of vacation this week, and we're glad for that. So if you reach out to the synod office and by email and you don't get an answer, it will be probably a week. So if you leave me a message, I'll try to respond. I should also say that Pastor Anderson is shutting off her phone and will not be responding to email because she's on medical leave. So people that text me and go, I reached out to Roseanne and she didn't answer, that's right. That is right. That's what's going on in terms of the work. I this week have meetings all day Monday, so I will be kind of out of pocket. On Tuesday, I'm meeting with a congregational council. I am so grateful for Zoom. On Wednesday, we have staff meeting. On Thursday is the conference deans, and another meeting after that, and then read roster minister reports on Thursday. And then on Friday, it's kind of an open day, which I'm grateful because through Friday and then on Friday, I'll be trying to catch up on some of the work that is coming my way. The reading for this coming Sunday, the 19th, is Jesus' encounter with the man born blind in John's Gospel. It is a very meaningful gospel reading to me. I love it very much. So I may have too much to say about it. So that's why I wanted to do the other stuff first. So the first thing to note, I think, is that John calls this man the man born blind more than John calls him the blind man. So I think in our preaching and in our conversation, we should call him the man born blind. The latest construction I've seen, which I like, is the man born with blindness. Because the disabilities community, people who live with disabilities, would rather be person first than to have people lead with their disabilities. So the man born blind, or the man that was healed, or the man born with blindness. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that we're dealing with blindness and seeing. We're dealing with darkness and light. And darkness and light are an important motif in John's Gospel that causes some to bristle because in our day, a layer of racial interpretation has been laid upon them. So we need to be aware of that and be careful not to say darkness is bad, right? On the other hand, I once wrote a long commentary on the verse, "In him there is no darkness at all," and spent half the article apologizing for it. And the article went out and people were using it in their congregations. And this lady called me up, and it was from a congregation in the South. She was a young African-American woman. And she said, "We used your article in Adult Bible Study on Sunday, and I've been charged to call you and say, black people get metaphor, Dr. Satterley." So it's really hard. So I am grateful to that lady, even all these years later. So we need to sort all that out, right? The other thing to notice about this reading, I think, is even though the man born blind is on stage, if you will, most of the time, Jesus is only in two scenes. Preaching and this reading and the Gospel of John are all about Jesus. So what do we do with that? So Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." He has said that a couple of times in John's Gospel, or will say it more in John's Gospel. So that might be something to look at, the places Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." And here we see that the brightness of Jesus' light is so bright, so illuminating, that even this man born with blindness sees. And more than seeing, he comes to know the truth about Jesus. The other thing I noticed in this text this time around, well, I've always known this part, is the man born with blindness sees Jesus clearly, while the Pharisees, the church leaders, fall farther and farther into not seeing. And Jesus says this when he says, when we say we see, we are blind and into sin, right? We also want to be careful not to equate blindness and sin, or at least blindness and personal sin. But what I've noticed, and when I read this week on this text, because I know this text so well that I wanted to go see what others say, is that this man born blind, healed, is, if you will, the story of Jesus in miniature. Jesus says, "Whoever wants to serve me must follow me, that where I am, the servant may be also." Well, I think this man born blind follows Jesus or precedes Jesus, but he certainly has the same life John presents Jesus having. So what do I mean by that? First, like Jesus, this man born with blindness has his identity challenged. Jesus is pretty clear that he's the Messiah. We've heard him say that first to the woman at the well last week, and he will say that kind of more and more, and they do not believe him. They challenge his identity. And in this reading, they challenge whether this man who now sees was the man born with blindness. So they challenge his identity. In response, Jesus, throughout John's Gospel, says, "I am, I am, I am." They are metaphors, but Jesus makes clear. And so this man born blind says, "I am, I am, I am." Like Jesus, the man born blind speaks truth. And like Jesus, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the establishment discredit him as an invalid witness. In response to all of this, both Jesus and the man born blind respond to the Pharisees with truth and with sarcasm. So the man born blind says to the leaders of the synagogue, "Who is he? Why, do you want to be his disciples too?" Which I think is great. And, I'm thinking of Jesus before Pilate. "Are you a king? That's what you say I am." So there's truthfulness and sarcasm going on. And both Jesus and the man born blind, in the end, are labeled sinners. So Jesus is the Messiah. The man born with blindness is a faithful witness to Jesus as the Messiah. And in response, they are both labeled sinners. And then finally, the man born with blindness is cast out of the synagogue, and Jesus is completely cast out on the cross. So the man born with blindness proceeds and follows Jesus. He shows Jesus to be the light of the world, who brings insight and physical sight, and who also reveals truth. And so if we keep with our baptismal idea, in the waters of baptism, it becomes the pool of Siloam, or the pool of healing. In the waters of baptism, Jesus gives us sight. St. Ambrose calls it the eyes of faith, to see through things through the eyes of faith. So when we get to Easter, we know that the beloved disciple ran into the tomb and saw the grave cloths and immediately thought, resurrection. Well, that's the eyes of faith. So we can look at things, and some people will see some things, but with the eyes of faith, we see others. And Jesus in baptism reveals truth. And the truth is that God is all-loving, and that God brings life out of death. For us, the man born blind shows that perhaps we as Christians, but certainly the church as the follower of Jesus and body of Christ, can expect to experience the same things that Jesus and this man born blind do. So we may identify Jesus as the Messiah, and some may reject that. What's interesting is, as I talk to people of other faiths and hear from people who didn't do interreligious work, they want us to humbly make our claims as Christians. They also want us to live as followers of Jesus. So the reality is, if we are more concerned with succeeding, with pleasing others, with keeping the status quo, we may end up more not seeing Jesus. So we can be faithful witnesses like this man born with blindness, and understand that there may be consequences for the church. That is the time in which we live. The good news, I think, is that in the waters of baptism, Jesus gives us sight and insight, the eyes of faith, and reveals to us the truth of who God is and abundant life. Then it becomes up to us what we do with that sight and insight and the truth. Do we follow Jesus and end up perhaps where he is? Or do we do what will please? If this is a joyous but unsettling reading, interpretation, and perhaps sermon, then I think we are being true to John's Gospel, and to the man born with blindness, and to Jesus himself. I am Bishop Craig, and this is Take One, and may the peace of Christ be with you always. Take care.